Let me ask you this. Are you the best man that you can be? Are you the best, if you're a husband, are you the best husband you can be? If you're a father, are you the best father you can be? If you're just a man in community, are you the best man showing up on your job or in community? Are you the best man?
Most people, when they think of violent relationships, they automatically think of physical violence, but it goes beyond that tremendously. We see aspects of emotional violence, mental violence, psychological violence. We see financial violence, which is not something that is commonly spoken about, but a lot of times victims are subjected to that act of violence by their abuser taking control of finances in order to keep them trapped in their abusive situation. We see sexual violence, stalking, which is not always considered an act of violence, but we see a wide array of it, so way more than just physical.
So the first thing that I think of related to men's violence is just, I guess in my mind, violence is kind of intertwined with masculinity. If you sort of think about the gender binary and you kind of have the ideas, the expectations, the norms, the stereotypes that we associate with men and masculinity, words like aggression, dominance, perhaps even violence come to mind.
When we look at the spectrum of violence, oftentimes if you ask the question, as you just did, what is violence, then most folks, if you were polling, would say, well, it starts with something that happens physically. I put my hands on the person. Matter of fact, a lot of the men that come into our program, that's the greatest kind of argument of resistance is, I never put my hands on her, or I never put my hands on my partner. So why am I here? Well, violence doesn't, or an abuse doesn't begin with just putting your hands on. There's a grooming process.
Journalists typically are dealing with what is provided by law enforcement and the courts, and physical violence is something that is so obvious. It's very much seen, whereas emotional violence is a lot harder to prove because it's hidden.
I would say it's probably the case that physical violence is perceived as violence in a way that other forms are not, where if a word is used and it causes harm, it's abusive. And you can find measurable impacts on people, right? Words can trigger PTSD, for example, in people. Words can hurt. When I was in elementary school, I was told that sticks and stones could break your bones, but words will never hurt you, and it's actually not true.
If you go into the mind of a perpetrator, which is kind of difficult to do that. All perpetrators are different based on whatever their experience has been. So oftentimes when you see a perpetrator, he is thought of to be this violent person, a criminal. He needs to have, it needs to be a punitive approach to bringing him to some sort of accountability for his actions or his behavior. To some degree, that is correct. But when I go inside the mind of a perpetrator or a violator, what comes to mind for me is that usually hurting people hurt people.
A lot of it has to do with the cycle of abuse. What is normal for me is not normal for you. And I hate the word normal because I don't believe there's any such thing as normal. But so many of our clients that we see were either raised in homes where abuse occurred, or that's what they know as normal, whereas you and I might have been raised in a home where abuse never occurred. So somebody who's in an abusive relationship, we don't understand their aspects of normal. But I think it has more to do with the environment that the person is in, where the person was raised, what they understand to be normal, is a big part of where abuse sets in.
I think women are more likely to be victims of domestic violence. Certainly there is a factor of toxic masculinity at play here. And when I say toxic masculinity, I mean men are under pressure from the time they grow up to be physical, right? As a child, like, you want to play sports. Most parents would not be okay. Even parents who are good natured and like have best of intentions, but if a 4-year-old boy wants to start playing with a Barbie doll, most parents would say absolutely not. And if you look at what boys typically play with, even the toys, they're a lot of times they're rooted in violence, like the Avengers and Spider-Man and superheroes. And so, yes, I think growing up there's a pressure for men to, one, if they are a victim of some sort of domestic violence, that would be incredibly embarrassing to a male to admit that. So I think there is a part of it that could be that, but I think overwhelmingly, I think the reason why we see more violence against women is because men are more violent creatures.
You got to be strong. You can't cry. You can't do, that's how boys per se are raised. But I don't necessarily think terminology or things that we say affect how men grow into their adult selves and whether or not they're going to be an abusive partner. I think a lot of that has to do with the type of environment that they grew up in, the modeled behavior that they see in their homes by those that raise them.
Kids are 5 or 6 and they're on the playground and they get into a conflict with other kids. Is it more likely that if it's a boy who's in the conflict, the violence will be dismissed, as opposed to, say, if it's a girl, right? Are girls told, well, that's not ladylike, versus if it's a boy, maybe, well, boys will be boys at the same time. If that kid is, say, playing dodgeball and they get hit in the face with the ball and they start crying because it hurts when you get in the face with the ball, that is a logical way for a child to express their emotions and the pain that they're experiencing, perhaps the embarrassment they're experiencing. Yet, if it's a boy who experiences that, we may, police that way of expressing emotions, which my understanding is that crying is a very healthy way for one to express difficult, painful emotions.
There's a part of me that feels bad for older men who struggle to adapt to the changes in society, and I kind of feel for them because I see this with some older men that I care about. But ultimately, it is up to the younger generations. I mean, that's what I'm looking at, to kind of redefine what being a man is.
Protecting women against violence from men, a huge one is education. We can't change unless we are educated, right? The more we know, the more responsible we are to make changes that we need in this world. So educating yourself, being willing to talk to people about your experiences. I can't tell you how many times I have seen survivors who have spoke about their experiences and what they went through and how they have come out on the other side and how that has inspired somebody else to do the same thing. So just not being ashamed of your experience, because your experience, your testimony, you being a survivor, that's going to inspire the next person or somebody else